The status quo pre-bellum is what's happening here. And not that I'm a little upset about it. but as a lawyer, the offense, and as a mother, I'll tell you, as a mother and grandmother, when I look at my grandchildren, of course, think what my poor children think about me. It doesn't matter what the conversation it turns to. What would you do? You're embracing my children, embracing their children, right? They're all babies. And what would you do? I'll tell you what I would do if someone took away my baby or my grandbaby. You know what I'd do. You get a little bit of thought about what I'd do. And this is the kind of feeling we're generating in the rest of the world, with the possible exception of Russia. And we haven't even started talking about subverting our electoral process intentionally. Yeah. And that is why I think, this is my last answer to you, because you've had the most hard to answer question, but the most important one. How are we going to do it? And actually a couple of you did, because you all are saying, how are we going to get to 2/3? Mueller is very important. You do not require a crime to impeach, but it sure helps. And even if he's just an unindicted co-conspirator, if it looks like the handwriting's on the wall and Mueller will try to go after him criminally, then I believe Trump will self-pardon. And you get into a situation where he claims to have self-pardoned, I don't think there's very many Republican senators who will want to go down in history as having someone who betrayed our trust to Russia, to intentionally, really that kind of crime requires an intentional cover-up from the nomination process or the candidate process on, to have overseen that, and the dictation, the confession this past week by the lawyers that Trump dictated the letter, the deceptive letter, talking about what happened at Trump Tower. That could be, I think that's the single most egregious problem he has for criminal purposes, because that's his intentional misconduct. He talked to Putin the week before. They talked about the Maginski Act and sanctions and how the adoptions were a small part of that. And so Trump's no fool. He's completely bereft of any humanity, but he's no fool. And so he has certain Hitler-like senses and abilities. And you know that the problem was going to be how to prove that Trump did it. They all confessed. They said he did it. And if they turn any of these witnesses, even if they are later given pardons, they will have evidence. And so if these Republican holdouts in the Senate, if it does go to the Senate, they're going to have to really look deeply into their heart. And by the way, if one impeachment doesn't work, you can impeach him again.
But they don't have a heart.
I think they worry about their future careers. I think they worry about their future. And look, and what about how history treats you? How about how history treats you? A lot of these guys are leaving because they either think they can't win or because they know what's coming up and they don't want to make the hard decisions. So, but we can't give up. And yes, I have hope, and I'm there and there, but just yell out if I forget. Short attention span.
Well, I agree that it's going to be very divisive.
Divisive.
If we ever try and do this.
Divisive if we try impeachment?
But I think that once we go through the process, the Senate will be the block, of course. And that will be a telling point. The only thing we can do is try our best to convince the Senate.
All we can do is our best to try to convince the Senate. I don't think it'll be divisive in this case. Clinton was a bit divisive, but it didn't harm the country. Okay. These impeachment processes are efficient and well thought out.
And so it won't be divisive in the Senate. It will be divisive in the country.
I don't think it'll be divisive of the country any more so than we are. You know, you have these pundits saying the same thing. You have pundits that say, and I think they're influenced by this Republican idea that we won't win as Democrats. But these pundits say we'll have revolution in the streets. Well, they didn't say revolution, they said we'll have violence in the streets. My God. What was Charleston if it wasn't violence in the streets? They murdered people for their political convictions. Avowed white supremacists murdered people for protesting racism. And you have a president. Let me give another example from Madison. I really like Madison. He really is. Hamilton is really up there too. Hamilton has some of the best quotes. Speaking of which, you know, most people get somebody famous to do a blurb on their jacket. This one came out too fast. We couldn't have anybody read it and give us a blurb. So the publisher chose Alexander Hamilton as my blurb on the back. Impeachment is based upon those offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men, from the abuse or violation of public trust, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to society itself. Hamilton went on the road also and wrote a vast amount of information in the Federalist Papers on it. So I do believe that impeachment is a regularized process. Were you guys in 2010 and 11 very interested in the 2 federal impeachments that were going on? No. Maybe they've just passed all over us. They were efficiently done, and they saved a huge number of people. Anybody remember who Samuel Kent was? Judge Sam Kent in Galveston, if you're a lawyer and happen to have the unhappy circumstance of being in front of him. Samuel Kent declared himself the Emperor of Galveston to the women that he sexually abused who worked for him. And they finally called him on it. Now, he did a lot of other bad things that he wasn't impeached for that we lawyers knew about, that what he was doing on the take. But Kent refused to resign his high office after he had to finally plead guilty to obstruction of justice and lying to the FBI about his misconduct when the second woman finally came forward. So he pled guilty to obstruction of justice, and he was sitting in prison, refusing to resign his high office. He was federal judge inmate. What? Federal judge inmate. And the only thing that caused him to become inmate Kent was the House, with no dissent, efficiently impeaching him. And you'd think that'd be enough. But no, he said he still wouldn't resign because he wanted that federal pension. He wanted that federal pension. And so what did Harry Reid do? He announced, thanks to Houston Chronicle's coverage of the entire matter, just brilliant coverage by Lisa A. Olson and some people at the Chronicle. He announced, we stand ready, we can do this, we're really efficient. And said, we stand ready to have the trial. We're ready to have the Senate trial now. And finally, when they served him with the papers saying, you're impeached, here's your notice of Senate trial, he then handed them his handwritten resignation. That monster was not required to have a Senate trial because he knew what was fixing to happen. And of course, Nixon didn't even wait for the House to vote. He saw the handwriting on the wall. So we've had a lot of resignations caused, even before the House acted. We have several of those. And I promised somebody that I forgot about, but I didn't quite.
Can the House and Senate members be impeached as well?
Good question. Can a House or Senate member be impeached? No, because the first impeachment in history of a senator named Blount, who was a land-swindling, corrupt, conflict of interest-ridden senator who had bought his way out of having to fight in the Revolution and used his post as a paymaster given to him by his father during the Revolution to buy Western lands, and fomented war to drive settlers out of Florida and elsewhere to go to his Western lands. He was impeached by the House. But before they could get anything done, they voted by House rules to just kick him out. And then the Senate had a trial. Well, that was backwards. This was the first impeachment. They didn't quite get it right. They didn't understand what process would work. So the Senate decided he's already gone, but they also decided to make sure this didn't happen in the future to any of them. They ruled twice. They said, number one, he is not amenable to impeachment because he's a member of Congress, and we are not civil high officers under the Constitution. And number two, because he was kicked out by the House under a different method, then we have those other methods, and so we're not subject to impeachment. The other way you could justify what is an absolute rule now, no, Congress is not subject to impeachment, is Impeachment is meant as a power of the Congress. It is the unique power under separation of powers in the Constitution, because there's no check and balance on impeachment. It can't be reviewed by the Supreme Court. That's a Rehnquist decision in something called Nixon v. United States. Not President Nixon, but a Judge West, who wanted to appeal his case to the Supreme Court. What a crook, Judge Nixon. And Nixon, by the way, these are some of the cases, these judge cases establish that lying on your tax returns and fraudulent tax returns and fraudulent bankruptcy, that kind of personal misconduct that's not related to your office, that's absolutely impeachable. No question. You know what? It's just like Capone. They're going to get him on the tax return. And it's impeachable. There's federal cases right on point. And if any of you say, oh, it's just a federal judge, not the president, there's different rules, you know who we can thank? You know which impeachment established that federal judge cases are apt and applicable to a presidency case? Bill Clinton. By God, the most important thing that came out of the Bill Clinton impeachment was when Lindsey Graham, then representative, now a senator, when Lindsey Graham was prosecuting that case, he was adamant, we're going to use these federal judge cases to prove that President Clinton's personal misbehavior is bad enough, just like what happened with these federal judges who committed tax fraud and bankruptcy fraud. They're applicable. And he used them to prosecute Clinton in the Senate. Lindsey Graham, he sure knows what he's talking about in impeachment. He couldn't make his case, but he used the cases, and therefore, personal misconduct by a president, absolutely impeachable, if it causes substantial harm to the country. Yes, ma'am.
How is it that Nixon was pardoned even though he was not impeached or convicted?
Oh, what a good question. We're combining, this is like the trifecta of questions. How is it that Nixon was pardoned even though he was an unindicted co-conspirator and he wasn't impeached? Number one, under the Constitution, you can't pardon impeachment, period. That's an exception, it's in the Constitution, and so a pardon will never cover an impeachment. Even an illegal self-pardon, we know can't cover impeachment. And that makes sense, because it's another reason why you shouldn't appeal impeachment, it shouldn't be appealable. Because when you impeach somebody, they're automatically removed from office. Line of succession means the vice president pops up. I know you're going to ask me some Pence questions. So if you were able to appeal impeachment or pardon impeachment, we'd have two presidents. It would be a mess. And the Founding Fathers recognized that, and they said you cannot pardon an impeachment. Not a conviction, by the way. If the House impeaches, I know I'm looking at you because I'm trying to give you some hope that it doesn't all lie with a bunch of crooked senators. So, if the House, I know, if the House impeaches, there can be no pardon of that impeachment. He remains impeached. Now, if he's convicted of a crime, he'd rule from his jail cell. If he resigns and Pence pardons, as Ford did to Nixon, that's doable. That's doable. But here's two things to have heart. Okay. Number one, Lordy, let's hope there are state crimes. Okay. There is no protection in pardon for a state crime. And my guess is some of the arrangements. I can't tell you how smart this Mueller guy appears. Everything strategic that they've done, it's so strategic, it like hurts my brain. And what they're doing, I think, is trying to preserve all avenues and do the right things so that they don't cut off. And New York is trying to amend some of its state statutes that would show if you're careful how you plead the federal statute and you let state allegations remain, future state allegations, then the states will go after them. And so there should be some state actions, including state attorneys general, ones would hope. So there's hope. And here's the other thing I was going to say. Not only do we Lordy hope there's state actions, these people are so incompetent and so poorly represented that they may screw up the nature of the pardon. You cannot pardon future misconduct. That's well understood. You cannot pardon future misconduct. You can only pardon that which has happened in the past. And if you do not describe accurately what has happened in the past, you're not pardoned for it. So in other words, you basically have to fess up and at least have the scope of the pardon so significant that you can't be attacked for it. So if he's been assaulting other women, folks,
so it's not a get out of jail free card.
It depends on how it's worded and how it's done.
I mean, there's not a blanket pardon.
It depends on how it's worded. Well, ordinarily, it goes through a whole process, the Office of Pardons. This president has chosen to just kind of do it willy-nilly. And he's got some decent minds working on it, but no, I've not examined any of the pardons. His self-pardon will be a thing to remember. There and there.
Samuel Kent.
Yes, sir.
Resigned.
In jail.
He knew he was going to be convicted by the Senate. So
yes.
So all charges were dropped.
No.
No? By the Senate?
Oh yes, there was the Senate actually has a formal process where they stop the proceeding, right, because a resignation should stop an impeachment. There's been some screw-ups in history that happened that are funny, but we won't go there.
Why did the local district attorney not file criminal charges against him?
He pled guilty to obstruction of justice. He was in jail for a year and a half.
Obstruction of justice.
He lied about
the sexual misconduct.
The sexual misconduct was an underlying was what he lied about and lied to the FBI about. I can't tell you what the decision was between the feds and the state about where they could get him easiest, and so the answer is I don't know. But I think a whole bunch of authorities got together and said, what can we do to get this man off the bench and into jail?
Practically speaking, Maxine Waters is one of the few.
Maxine Waters, yes. Advocating for impeachment, yes.
However, Nancy Pelosi and some of the other Democrats have
But
always said
Pelosi's trying to tap it.
So our mission should be to get our Democrats on board. I understand.
There's a mission to get Democrats on board too. Yes.
To take over the
Hence, I'm here.
Ideal.
I'm not going around to Republican clubs much. Yes, sir.
Just a real quick comment.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court has actually weighed in two aspects on pardons. Number one, it has to be accepted to be effective. And secondly, it is a tacit admission of guilt. Right.
The concept that there's certain basic principles that one establishes for a pardon. You're supposed to say, basically, I'm sorry and I did it. But there's nothing normal about anything that's happening. And I can't tell you how many Supreme Court cases are being violated daily if they're not changed by Gorsuch and company. And I'm now forgetting who was. Somebody over there had a hand.
Where can I get your book?
I have a box. You know, this is like my plant in the audience. I sell them for $10 each. What I really should do is have the bookstore order them, sell them to you for $15 under the price. But I've got them here for $10. So, but you can buy them. Of course, I have a pen. I brought a pen. Yeah. Oh, follow me at TX Barbara Ann, not Texas Barbara Ann. Follow me at TX Barbara Ann, because I'm just one little voice, but man, I tell you, 2 weeks ago I started talking about self-pardon, and I started replying to all these famous pundits and all these congressmen who were Democrats, kind of decrying it all, and I just said, he's gonna self-pardon, he's gonna self-pardon, he's gonna self-pardon. And then the letter, they produced the letter that the president's really stupid lawyers wrote in January that got conveyed that said, a little bit of a sub-rosa thing that said he probably can self-pardon if he wants, but he may not do it. And then everything hit the fan, and I got a call from the New York Daily News, so somebody listens to my tweets, and I'm trying to poke these people and get them to start talking about it because it's so important. If we wait till after the election, I think many of these Congress people on both sides will say, we have no mandate, it wasn't discussed. And then when the president is reelected, I fear that what's going to be said is, he has an electoral mandate. and so we're not going to impeach him, and he is going to be term limited, so there's nothing you need to do. Something the founders thought about, and they said it doesn't matter that he only has, at the time they were thinking 1 6-year term perhaps. What matters is that you remove someone now for the harm he's causing and will continue to cause. This harm analysis, that there's causation of harm, it's the key. There is no question. And the fact that people don't want to deal with it because it rocks the boat, but it will not cause a revolution. It is a process that's been tried and true and used with increasing frequency. Since the time of Nixon, we've had an increasing number of impeachments, all handled perfectly, and there never was any revolution in the street, nor after Clinton's. There's just never been a revolution in the street not after Porteous and Kent, the most recent ones. We've had more in the 21st century than you can throw a stick at.
But none of them presidential.
No, there's only been 2 presidential impeachments in the history of the country, Johnson and Clinton.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you one other thing about well, 2 actually, but about it must cause harm.
It must cause harm.
Well, I don't think there are that many Republicans that think any of this is causing harm. And so, how do you prove causing harm to the country?
This is a great question. Let me give you an example. In my draft articles of impeachment, the first one is racial animus and what Madison called schemes of oppression. Madison said that a scheme of oppression is, in and of itself, impeachable. When the president misuses his massive communications platforms, he's given complete carte blanche on Twitter because he's regarded as a head of a country, and heads of state aren't regulated by Twitter. He's able to say anything he wants. I mentioned the fact that he is now openly, actively engaging with white supremacists and appointing them. His commissioner for refugees is one such person. His actions, his whole action with the private football leagues and Tom, the guy, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Thank you. Not Tom Jones. Jerry Jones.
That's not unusual.
So Jerry Jones has confessed the president called him and pressured him to tell his players what they had to do. That's a scheme of oppression. Those players have constitutional rights. They're allowed to speak and act just like you and I are allowed. We're allowed to be here. If it's still a free country, I'm still allowed to say what I'm saying. And I'm still saying it. And whoever's listening, screw you, because we're allowed to say it. So these rights of free speech, we have rights of free speech. And these men who are getting their heads bashed in and endangering their health for the rest of their lives, supporting their families and supporting a lot of good causes, these men are allowed to take a knee. They're absolutely allowed to take a knee. It is a quiet protest, and of course we all know that, but it sometimes gets lost. And so when the president schemes, not just with Jerry Jones, but when he schemes with the vice president to make a faux appearance at a football game so that he can walk out, and confesses, Trump confesses by tweet that actually was what was planned. That's a scheme of oppression. That's impeachable. Now, how do we show causation of harm? There are a number of studies coming out now, most notably by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're doing a better job than any other defamation organization. Southern Poverty Law Center on around August 7th of 2017 published a remarkable study where they're showing the Trump effect. And that's, I think, where the actual verbiage started. So there are studies being shown, and you use epidemiological studies. For example, there is one that's come out that said during Hillary's campaigning, there was no uptick in violence in any of the cities in which she had rallies. The opposite is true for Trump. In the cities where Trump had rallies while he was campaigning, there was an uptick in violence. The Trump effect is a valid psychological theory, and it's been proven in practice. There is an increase in hate crimes in this country, and those are also measurable. And so what Congress needs to do, and what I've been telling Congress, Get an expert witness. Any of you trial lawyers? By God, that's a basic thing you do. You have to marshal your evidence, and you have to use experts to prove it. There's epidemiological evidence, and again, I recommend to you above all, Southern Poverty Law Center, and you're going to be surprised at this, West Point. West Point, for some reason, has a study group that also does work almost as good as Southern Poverty Law Center. Who knew? Twitter.
Are the attacks on the press impeachable?
Definitely. The press is the only industry protected in the Constitution. There's only one business protected in the Constitution. It's the free press. Violation of the First Amendment, the right of a free press, absolutely. And those are legion.
Do Pence's actions with that football game put him in danger of impeachment?
What a good question. Pence's singular action in the football game to say that he was in cahoots with Trump could certainly be pled. Whether it is a significant enough substantial effect is questionable. But I think instead, or in addition, because really what you need to do is you need to plead it a lot of different ways, put that in there. The man was head of transition.
That's what I said.
The man knew, or was incompetent, what was going on. I mean, Flynn happened on his watch.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Trump transition in cahoots with Russia, trying to open up a channel to Russia through his family, friends, including Pence. And so the real question is, does Congress have the wherewithal, as they did with Portheus and Kent, to basically run two investigations at the same time? The answer is yes, they've done it before. They've had ongoing investigations at the same time. And calling for impeachment is not the same as saying, let's go have a vote, although Al Green was within his rights to test it. Let me say we benefited from Al Green's test because there were 30 more votes than anybody had expected for impeachment. And so we were able to identify the people who had the courage to come out and say, even now, we can impeach. So there is nothing wrong with starting the process, educating people, so the media covers it. Media won't cover it unless somebody gets in the news. And when Trump talked about self-pardon, I was able to get a little bit of FaceTime for about 24 hours. And then I wrote an op-ed and they said, that's yesterday's news. You know, so you've got to hit it. You've got to hit it at exactly the right time.
What about lying to the American people?
Impeachable. As a matter of fact, impeachable under the Clinton articles of impeachment.
But to cause harm
Deceiving.
to the country? To cause harm to the country?
Well, the Clinton articles of impeachment talked about deceiving the public, and then at the bottom line said to manifest injury of the United States. And so they used this magic language, manifest injury of the United States. Well, manifest means, you know, you could see it, it's obvious. Well, it wasn't so obvious. And so pleading it is one thing, but any trial lawyers in the room will know you got to prove it.
Right.
And that's where the rubber hits the road in the Senate. Because the House are prosecutors. They're prosecuting the case, they're writing the charges, they're voting on the charges. The Senate is the one that says, have you proven the case as outlined? And the Senate can act as judge too and say, we'll allow you to reframe, well, we will require you, for the benefit of the officer, the president or the judge, we'll require you to reframe so they understand what the charges are against you. But there's tremendous leeway. It's a really interesting process. As I said at the beginning, it's neither a civil process, like these emoluments lawsuits you hear about. They're not going to do anything. Emolument lawsuit, maybe you'll get money if you have standing. That's a real question. Sue the president for emoluments, maybe I'll have to pay you money. Well, remove him from office? And if you prove that it's an emolument, which means a gift from a foreign power, or in the state situation, a gift from a state, that doesn't remove him from office. And some people want to plead emoluments as an article of impeachment. Well, you don't need to. That's a burden you don't have. You don't have to prove it was a constitutional emolument. You just need to prove that whatever it was, whatever gift he got or whatever conflict of interest caused harm to the country. And so all of these really smart East Coast law professors, many of whom were defending Bill Clinton, and this is what they thought impeachment should be. They thought impeachment should be something really, really serious in terms of your official act. They could not countenance the idea that an incompetent, negligent boob of a president or evil man would just thoughtlessly do stuff and put us on the brink of nuclear war, who would destroy our alliances, destroy our relationships with countries, disregard the importance of NATO, and get in bed with Russia. They didn't think that there'd be such a person. And so when they were defending Clinton, they said, it has to be some really serious, substantial official act, as opposed to just being a complete, many of the words that have been used by former employees of the president. So, it is what it is. Yes. And I gave away all my change, so if you had real $10 bills.
$10. Right.
Are you doing cards or?
Am I doing what?
Credit card?
No. If my husband were here, we would.
Okay.
No.
Can we buy them on Amazon?
Yes, you can buy them on Amazon.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, there's like a ton of A Citizen's Guide to Impeachment books, but mine's the only one by Barbara Radnofsky. After mine came out, this fancy Harvard professor wrote something called Impeachment, A Citizen's Guide. Oh, really? Mine's better than his. He's pretty smart. He's real smart. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.